Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as I want to dive into my tier list for this upcoming, for the NFL headed into week 2. Haven't done this quite yet, so the way that and the tier names will probably change week to week, but we have still some pieces away, young and talented with established coaches, playoff upsides, dark horse candidates, Super Bowl hopefuls, and picking up where they left off. So we're going to start from the bottom moving up here. Still some pieces away. The Titans, the Giants, the Panthers, the Commanders, the Patriots, and the Raiders. Now, there are a couple teams that could have an argument for being a little bit higher up in this exercise. I think that the Commanders are a team that there's still a lot of unknown there, considering the fact that we don't fully know what Jaden Daniels is going to be just yet. Dan Quinn, I'm not super high on, but there's still a lot of unknown as well of him as a head coach. That Commanders defense did not look good, though, and they ended up getting steamrolled by the Buccaneers, where, yes, you want to give the Buccaneers credit. Baker Mayfield looked incredible. He was probably the best quarterback in week 1. There's a lot of room to, there's a lot of praise to give around here to the Buccaneers. That being said, I just don't think the Commanders are that good. I never really saw the hope for them this upcoming season. I think that they're still a work in progress, that they need a lot of upgrades on that defensive side of the ball. They're without a really reliable wide receiver 2 at this moment behind Terry McLaurin. So I have the Commanders still a few pieces away. I also do for the Raiders as well, where the Raiders do have a lot of talent. We talked about that defense earlier in the show. Christian Wilkins, Max Crosby, obviously, 2 of the best defensive linemen / edge rushers in the NFL, and the 2 of them being on a line together is just downright scary. But I have no hope whatsoever at that quarterback position for them. Gardner Minshew's fine, but he is not anywhere near the top 50% of quarterbacks in the NFL. It's a very uninspiring quarterback room there, in my opinion. We saw him struggle this past week. I don't really anticipate things getting any better for them. But, so, again, I'm rooting for Antonio Pierce there as well, but I do think that they are going to be towards the bottom of the NFL this upcoming season. Young and talented with established coaches, the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Chargers. Now, I think that these teams can surprise people. And the first thing I sort of want to hit on here is I do have the Vikings in this category. Kevin O'Connell has not been a super established coach, but I think that he's on the cusp of that. I think he's a great coach. I think he's a great offensive mind, and I think that this offense is going to be able to overachieve some. Their offensive line isn't great, but they have an excellent blindside tackle in Christian Darrisaw. I really don't think that they're one of the worst groups in the league in terms of offensive lines, that if they can hold up, they just added Aaron Jones, and Sam Darnold, he's not extremely inspiring, I should say, but he's somebody that if he can just make the plays, he just went on the road and played pretty well, all things considered. I know it was against the Giants, but I think that any one of these 3 teams could sort of take a step forward earlier than we were anticipating. The Broncos didn't look great this past week, but they do have some interesting pieces there. The Broncos could have an argument to be lower on this list, but I also think that offense with Sean Payton and Bo Nix could be a little bit more competitive than people are anticipating. And then Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. A lot of people are very much on the Chargers for taking a huge step forward. I don't think they're a playoff team, truthfully. I would be surprised if they end up being that. If they do, I already have a tremendous amount of respect for Jim Harbaugh, so I suppose it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world, but definitely nothing that I am banking on. But the playoff upside teams that I have are the Saints, Steelers, Cardinals, Browns, Falcons, Buccaneers, Colts, and Seahawks. A lot of that NFC South. I don't think that anybody is great. and somebody has to come out of the division. Now, obviously, everybody is way down on the Falcons based off of that Week 1 performance, and I understand why. That being said, it was Kirk Cousins playing football for the first time since in just about a year. It was late October last year that he went down, so ultimately he's going to look better than he did in this past game. He was under pressure the entire game. That offensive line is not as bad as they played in this game. I thought they moved people well in the running game. That's a tough Steelers defense more than anything. So I do have 3 of the 4 NFC South teams in this tier here. Like I already talked about the Buccaneers a little bit. Great, excellent performance. I'm going to need to see them do it. I'm going to need to see them do it against other teams other than the Washington Commanders before I'm really betting on them to have a chance of making a deep postseason run. But outside of that, with this tier, the Browns are here. I know another team that a lot of people are throwing into the fire after this week, and I understand why, but couple key injuries on the offensive line facing a very talented defense in Dallas. I think that the Browns can respond to this game. Deshaun Watson, would I be putting faith into him? No, not necessarily, but again, I just sort of look at it. They made the playoffs last year with Joe Flacco. I think that if you get league average play, that's a very good defense, and they should be able to take a step forward. We have a comment here from Shaquille Pope saying, if your list Bears are not good, they 4 or 5 team. Not totally sure what we're meaning there, but that does bring me on to the dark horse candidates, where I do have the Bears in there. It's the Bears, Dolphins, Jets, Rams, Jaguars, Bills, Bengals, and Cowboys. And for these teams, I think they are, not shoo-ins for the playoffs by any means, but could make playoffs and could make some noise from there. And I have the Bears. I understand that the offense looked a bit disastrous and disjointed Week 1. Caleb Williams making his NFL debut. I think that they can clean that up, and I am a huge believer in that defense, in Matt Eberflus, and the overall foundation of that team. So I think that they can sort of climb their way up here. Again, I'm not even guaranteeing that they make the playoffs this upcoming season. I did predict them as a 10-win team to make the playoffs, so that's kind of where I'm leaning with them. And if that's the worst you're going to get from Caleb Williams this upcoming season, I think that you're in a pretty good position, because I don't anticipate him throwing for less than 100 games in a full game again this upcoming season. But other teams on this list as well. I mean, the Cowboys obviously dominated the Browns in Week 1. I thought that it was a little bit more of the Browns sort of imploding on themselves. Again, ton of credit to the defense of Dallas, that they are definitely some game wreckers there. But I have questions on the offensive side of the ball of, can their offensive line hold up long term? Are they going to be able to develop a run game? They did an excellent job of sort of force feeding CeeDee Lamb in this game, getting him as involved as possible. But I'm not ready to sort of put them in that Super Bowl contender category just yet. Again, a dark horse team that doesn't really feel all that dark horse because everybody talks about the Cowboys, but I think they are an outside shot of making a Super Bowl run looking in at this current moment, with the possibility of doing so, because it is a pretty talented roster. Super Bowl hopefuls, I have the Ravens, Lions, Packers, Texans, and Eagles. It was hard to sort of not put some of these teams higher, but I think that all of them showed some flaws in Week 1 / just are probably, we're just waiting for them to establish themselves a little bit more. None of them have had extensive playoff success in their current iterations. I suppose the closest, I don't think you could really get there with any of these teams, honestly. I mean, the Eagles obviously make the Super Bowl a couple years ago, but there are still some question marks with that defense. The Texans, still a team that's relying on a lot of youth. We need to see what a sophomore season of CJ Stroud looks like with all the film on him. He looked good, not great in week 1. A bad red zone interception. Could have had a couple other interceptions if some penalties were called a different way. So I think that they have some room to grow. The Packers, they're Super Bowl hopefuls. You could put them in dark horse candidates because of the fact that Jordan Love is now injured for a few weeks, and they could find themselves in a little bit of a hole moving forwards here. But I think that when fully healthy, they are competitive and on par with the rest of these teams in the category. Lions end up winning the game. Was a little bit scarier than it had to be, especially considering the fact that the Rams were dealing with so many injuries and it did take an overtime win there. But that being said, a very talented roster there, and they're hoping that they can pull off similar success. A pretty favorable schedule this upcoming season, in my opinion, outside of the division games. And then the Ravens, debatably the best team in the NFL last year. I know they obviously lose to the Chiefs, but on paper talent, they were excellent. Now they lose Mike McDonald on the defensive side of the ball, lose a couple other key assistants along with that, new starters on the offensive line. So they do definitely have questions surrounding them, which brings me to the tier 1, which is picking up where they left off. And that, to me, is the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Both of them with big wins in week 1 were able to, show that, yeah, people can doubt us because we made the Super Bowl last year, Super Bowl hangover, yada, yada, but they're still the 2 best teams in the NFL, in my opinion, and then everybody else is sort of playing from there. And I was especially impressed. I mean, the Chiefs winning a close game against the Ravens, that obviously, they looked better, I thought, than they were last season, especially with the offensive explosion that they do have there. We'll mention that, yeah, sure, Lamar Jackson ran on them a little bit. They lost Willie Gay in the offseason, who is sort of their linebacker that's a little bit more of a spy role traditionally from what they had for last season. They lose L'Jarius Sneed, but didn't even really notice it in this game. But, they're still the defending champs. The 49ers were able to dominate the Jets for the most part on Monday Night Football. And I think that, they were dealing with a lot of noise this past offseason. Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams' contract holdouts for a while, but they looked excellent once again. And their defense is only going to get better once Dre Greenlaw comes back, once Talanoa Hufanga sort of starts to work himself back into the swing of things a little bit more. Former All-Pro safety that suffered a season-ending injury last year, that he was good, but there's another level that he can go from what he has shown so far. So this is where we're at heading into week 2. Let me know what your criticisms are. Of course, you're not going to have a perfect list like this, but I do feel pretty good about the way that these teams are grouped. But let me know what you agree with, disagree with in the comments section, as we're now going to head into our final segment of the day, where we will be reacting to the news that was announced this past weekend. We've had so much this week that, it's been hard to, keep up with everything, that the Denver Nuggets have signed point guard Jamal Murray to a max contract extension. So we will be talking about what that sort of means for the Nuggets this upcoming season. Before we do get into that, though, we'll address a quick comment here in the comment section from Cap for Life. A little fantasy football advice that also haven't really gotten a chance to do fantasy football this week, so this will be our short little segment here where he's talking about 14-team points PPR league. It looks like Josh Allen, Josh Jacobs, Devin Achane, Rashee Rice, Michael Pittman, Trey McBride need a flex option between Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Tank Bigsby, Colby Parkinson, Greg Dortch, or Jeff Wilson. Do I go after Zeke or Zach Moss or Zamir White? And then he also has a trade here. You're throwing a lot at me here, but appreciate the comments here. I think out of your flex options that you just listed, I mean, I don't have the schedules for this upcoming week in front of me, but I mean, Khalil Shakir able to score this past weekend. We've definitely seen a continued relationship building there between Josh Allen and Shakir. Josh Allen, the fact of the matter is the rushing yards are excellent and he's more than capable of doing it. It's not super sustainable, so I do like Khalil Shakir a lot. I want to say they're facing the Dolphins this upcoming week on Thursday Night Football. So I think that that's probably a pretty solid option to go with. And then he has another question here. Would you trade Rice and Coleman for Devontae Smith and Zach Moss? That's a pretty interesting trade there. The thing is I believe in Rashee Rice's upside for this season. The Chiefs need a number one wide receiver because Travis Kelce, I do think, is going to be a little bit more reserved until the postseason. So Rashee Rice, I mean, he was excellent. He was sort of the guy in those intermediate routes that we've seen Kelce sort of feasting on for so long, that Rice was able to get himself open in those situations as well. We've seen Patrick Mahomes in the past go to those types of players as well. So I would probably hesitate on that deal. You mentioned your running backs are Josh Jacobs and Devin Achane. I mean, I suppose you could maybe use a little bit more depth at the running back position, and Zach Moss is interesting. Devontae Smith, a lot of people are super high on in terms of a fantasy outlook. I have him in one of my leagues, Devontae Smith, but it does always worry me a little bit having that second option as well. My answer would probably be no as of this exact moment, off the gates there. But I mean, I understand Devontae Smith is a very good player. I just maybe have a little bit of hesitations as well with Zach Moss as a running back one, but we'll see. I feel like that could potentially change long term. So I would say no to your trade idea, but hope that helps for whatever that's worth. But we are now going to move into our last segment here on the note of the Denver Nuggets contract extension with Jamal Murray. So we will be back with that. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.